Just a couple every generation that wasn't supposed to make it out, but decode the matrix. And when they get to speak, it's like a coded language.
What's happening, people? Welcome back. Welcome back to Existential Rehab, issue number 6. In this installment of the podcast, in this episode of Existential Rehab, I'm discussing everyone's favorite topic, nihilism. But I'm not talking about it as I generally do in life and on this channel, where I caution people against accepting nihilism as their ultimate and final fate, or where I try to show people how to subjectively construct meaning that strengthens and is indelible and lasts and gives purpose to their existence. I'm not doing that in this episode. What I'm telling you in this installment is that you must be nihilistic, that everyone that ever wants to be an autonomous, independent, mature, adult, free-thinking being must at some point, in some way, some fashion, for some duration, experience complete and absolute nihilism. It's essential. And the reason that I say it's essential is because we are quite literally a species adrift. That's how I see it, and that's how I think anybody that's reasonable and has any perspective and objectivity and detachment to a degree should and will see it. We are a continuum and a collective of an organism, of a species, of humanity that exists on the surface of a rocky geodesic with a molten core that orbits a normal star around 90-something million miles away, and we're hurtling through space and time. This is absurd. This is insane. We do not have an overarching narrative that underpins the continuum's efforts. We don't have a point or goal for the collective currently. We exist, but we don't know why we exist, and we haven't even decided collectively what the point of us is, why humanity exists, what we're aiming at, what our goal is as a whole. We have a bunch of individual goals, and they seem to be somewhat contained through the structure of economics and society and culture. So no one really deviates too far, but there is no overarching goal for the species. There is not even really an overarching goal for most nations that don't have an autocratic or authoritarian leadership structure. So we are a species adrift. Our understanding is incredibly limited about the reality we inhabit, including ourselves. We don't understand the origin of reality. We don't understand the point of this universe. We don't understand the full, complete workings of this physical framework that we call space and time and mass and energy and things like this. We don't understand the dividing line, the gradient between life and non-life, even though we know a cell is arguably and inarguably the building block, the final, most fundamental and essential building block of life. We know that what it's composed of isn't technically life. So we don't understand what the key ingredient, the recipe is that creates life. We don't understand a great deal. So what we have done, in my opinion, as a species throughout history is create stories for the mind to ease our ignorance and our dissonance. We have constructed narratives, and many of them have persisted throughout time. Race is one that is more recent, but Christianity, religion, creation stories, things like this have existed and persisted for a much longer duration. The divide between men and women has maybe existed even longer between us as a species, as members of a species, even longer than religion and things like this. So we create these narratives about distinction, about purpose, about role, about identity, about nature, about everything, because we're children. We are children, not individually, but as a collective whole. We average out to be childlike as a species, or juvenile at best. And what children do, and what people that don't understand do and can't tolerate the ignorance or the dissonance or the gulf and gap and void in knowledge, is they create stories, narratives to fill in that gap. They make sense of the world. What we need is an understanding, and we don't have that. Not a deep and robust understanding of really anything other than the systems we create, and we don't even really understand those fully. So we've made a lot of narratives and stories to make sense of the world as a child would. A child looks at the world, looks at something complicated, something that it doesn't understand, or something that it fears, like a dark room or a closed or locked door or someone's facial expressions, and they create a story or a narrative to make sense of it to them. And that's all we've done. Is we've done a lot of sense making. But once again, sense making is not understanding. So we're a species adrift. What that means to me is that we cannot adopt blindly any narrative whatsoever that we've been handed that exists previously without checking and vetting and congruing subjectively, independently. I agree with a lot of people that exist today. Not all people and not even most people, but I agree with a number of people on a number of issues, but really no one entirely, no one completely. I agree with these people on scientific method being one of the best approaches for gaining empirical knowledge. That's just hard to argue, in my opinion. So I agree with scientists and physicists about their findings and their reports, because I'm not going to go check their experiments and duplicate their tests and all of this. So I accept certain things on face value because it seems to yield benefit. I assess knowledge and information on a variety of different scales and filter them through different lenses, but everything is taken with a grain of salt. No one knows anything. Everyone's operating off of shaky foundation. Even if they understand physics and science, they don't understand themselves. So they may modify or alter the results and peer reviewing and things like this, and which experiments get funded and pushed to the front. So I do agree with people, and I agree with some of these Buddhists and Hindus and spiritual people and psychonauts, people that take psychedelic substances to expand their mind. I agree with a lot of the things that they say. And some people that do yoga and all these things and meditate, I agree with a lot of people, but I don't accept anything that I haven't confirmed or haven't arrived at rationally, independently. You can't accept anything. You must be nihilistic, because everything is built, once again, off of a continuum of sense making. And because we've become so attached and so identified with a lot of the stories and narratives about who we are, about what that nation is, about your history, your culture, your lineage, maybe, let me pause right there. Maybe I'm a little bit privileged in being able to let go of this desire and need to identify with history, because I'm descendant from slaves, and the history is irrelevant to me to a degree in terms of my individual and personal identity. But I understand that many people don't see it like this. So we have a difficult time letting go of our local history of our family and our grandparents and great-grandparents and our ethnic and racial and cultural history. We have a great deal of time letting go or not identifying completely and entirely with our financial status and economic history in life and reality. So all of these factors play into the fact that we are young and we question a lot of things, but we also want some life and some happiness and joy in the world. And by the time we get to a certain point, whether it's in our 20s or 30s, or maybe even our 40s, sometimes in our teens, we make a concession between challenging established narratives and finding a place in the world that's agreeable within the narrative. So in a sense, what I'm saying directly, maybe what I'm saying is that even though a lot of people realize that this is just stuff that people that don't know much better than them, or maybe know less well than them, have come up with, constructed to make sense of the world, to organize us, they don't challenge it completely and entirely to its completion, to become fully nihilistic, because that would mean that they cannot find a tolerable place, comfortable place within the narrative. So what we end up doing is continuing the narrative. By the time we're 20, 30, 40, we want to have children and all of this, and we don't want them to be weird. So we teach them some of the same stories, even though we don't believe in them. So we're all complicit to a degree in supporting and furthering narratives, but we should never necessarily believe in them, accept them, or adopt them blindly. I would avoid that and advise against that entirely and completely and forever, until we come to a collective agreement on this. And then we can accept that as our narrative, human nature, human beings' narrative, the human goal and purpose as determined by us. So we are a species adrift, and other people at this point in your life don't know much more than you, and maybe you know much more than most people. So you cannot accept and adopt anything really as your identity, as your nature, as your essence, as a purpose and a point, because at some point the mind will see through it. At some point you will have it challenged, and at some point it's likely in this dynamic and turbulent world that it will be taken from you, whether you want it to be taken or not, by being exposed to new experiences and new information. So because we cannot accept anything blindly, we cannot forego the work of finding meaning and purpose on our own, which means that we have to see the world before we can even begin doing this as it is, which is objectively arbitrary and meaningless. We have to see life and existence and the reality we inhabit as objectively arbitrary and meaningless, or objectively equivalent, which may mean the same thing to you. Until we see this, we don't have the proper incentive, the proper motive, the proper drive and energy to find our way through. And I think that's what is needed. You must settle into nihilism, accept that you don't know, accept that you may never know in the way you'd like to know, and then find a way to be good within that. You must accept that this is the state and case and condition for everyone that isn't living in a narrative, believing something that they cannot confirm, something that they can't logically or rationally support, and only doing that because it makes them feel good and is preferable to nothing mattering, or preferable to you are equivalent to everyone else, or preferable to your life is all you know, and this experience of existence is all that you'll potentially have. No one that hasn't become fully nihilistic and made their way through is going to have an easy time accepting these things, because it challenges the nature, the intuitive experience and feeling we have of us. Now, until we challenge everything, we aren't truly nihilistic, in my opinion. And I mean everything. And you don't necessarily have to do this piecemeal by working your way through every subject matter and topic and issue in the world. I think just sense perspective can allow you to accept, allow the mind to accept that nothing is true, at least in the intellectual and rational sense, in an objectively verifiable way, except that we exist. We know that we exist because we're experiencing, and experience necessitates a subject of experience, something to experience, and an experiencer. There must be a relationship. So we know that at least two things exist. We're experiencing something called existence and reality, no matter the nature of those things, and someone must be experiencing, and it seems like that someone is us. Now, we don't know the nature of our bodies. We don't know the nature of, like I said, matter, physics. We don't know the nature of reality. We don't know any of these things for certainty. So it could be a simulation. It could be anything else. But what we do know is that something is being experienced, and we do experience, so we exist. Other than that, everything is debatable and questionable. And I don't think you should do anything but challenge anyone that's saying or claiming anything to a certainty, except for what you can't challenge, which is your experiencing. So we're here. And until you arrive at this point, you are lost. You're lost in narrative. You're lost in story. You can't see the world clearly. You can't make sense of things because you're hamstrung. You're basically skewed. You're trying to make sense and reason of a world while holding on to things that are comfortable, that may strengthen you in terms of your sense of identity and self, but aren't congruent with an objectively, rationally understood experience of existence and reality. And I think that's what a lot of people do. They don't want to let go of it all. And a lot of people that claim to be nihilistic just aren't. They aren't absolutely. And that's where you have to become. That's where you have to be. And that's what you have to become if you're going to truly find your way through. Because until you have seen through everything, and you, like I said, again, you don't have to do this piecemeal, just an understanding that everything is debatable and everything may be an illusion. Everything may be hallucinatory. Everything may be wrong or untrue in some way. Until you do that in a wholesale fashion, you have basically limited your ability to see by clouding your perspective, your awareness, and your mental capacity to understand with objects, stories, narratives, structures that you must work around. And now you have to bend reality like many religions do. Bend it, modify it in a really unreasonable way to accommodate truths and new perspectives and new opinions. You don't want to let go of what you're holding because that's the core and crux of your existence, of your narrative, of your story. But you also can't deny sometimes what has been shown to you. So you modify your story to assimilate this. Well, that's not what we should be doing, in my opinion. We can make up stories. I have narratives, I have explanations, but we should never be using them to define reality fundamentally and absolutely. we should exist nihilistically forever to a degree in an absolute sense. I am absolutely nihilistic. Not that I don't believe meaning and purpose can exist. I think that they definitely do. I think that's unquestioned. I just don't believe that they exist in an absolute, an ultimate, and final, and essential sense. The meaning and purpose that we experience, if we ever get to experience that, is subjective. And it can only be that, in my opinion, because we can only experience elevation and de-elevation and reduction from a limited vantage point. So quite literally, we are the ones that create the meaning and the purpose. And we, looking at things broadly, are the ones that create nihilism and create, in a sense, meaninglessness. So unless we have a reason to take a broad view, I think we can find our way through nihilism, through absolute nihilism, by narrowing our focus and concern back down to ourselves and our lives and at the individual level. No, we won't know if these actions impact the entirety of existence and reality in some significant way, because they probably won't. But what we can do is find meaning, significance, purpose, motivation from a limited vantage point. I think I said in the previous podcast episode, it's kind of like you can't arbitrarily, that's the wrong word, you can't objectively determine the best ice cream flavor for everyone, because that's not possible. You will never know what another person experiences, but you can determine the best flavor for yourself. So this is what I'm talking about ultimately. You determine what's meaningful, significant, elevated, prized, privilege to you, and that is your meaning, and you can find purpose within that. You just know that it isn't true and applicable and definitive for the rest of reality as a whole. So becoming nihilistic, becoming absolutely nihilistic, becoming deep and almost one with the void is essential, because that's the only place where true clarity and perspective are had. Once you arrive at that point, then you can start using your mind from a clean place, a clean, unadulterated place and vantage point to start building a more sensible and intelligible view of existence as a whole, a more sensible and intelligent view of yourself as a whole. No longer burdened by needing to make sense of yourself within your family structure. Well, I'm such and such, but I'm also such and such as mom or brother or sister or what have you. No, you exist. These people exist as well, seemingly, and you have a genetic relationship to them and an emotional attachment, and you spend time and space with them, and they mean a great deal to you. They're more meaningful to you maybe than other human beings, so they're elevated in all this. But these stories and narratives about family, about legacy, about right and wrong, about history, about good and bad, about purpose and meaning, about honor and virtue, and all of these things and that have been just developed and cultivated throughout history that help us organize ourselves within a societal structure, we need to let go of those if we're ever going to build a rational, indelible, supportive, and strengthening personal narrative and story about reality and existence, which is what we need, which is what meaning and purpose are, essentially. It's your story. Now, if we're sensible, your story should be congruent and overlapping with others to a degree, at least some point, some portion, since we're all generally human, but it should be your own. You should arrive at it independently. So this is why I say you must be nihilistic. Nihilism is the beginning. Until you arrive there, you've not really arrived anywhere. Until you are absolutely nihilistic and seeing that the entirety, not just church and religion and all of these things, not just school and work and purpose, not just relationships have no ultimate significance, not just your activities and career and hobbies and works of art are ultimately meaningless in some objective sense, in absolute sense, universal sense. Not just seeing that, but until you see all of reality in existence as equivalent, you haven't even begun. So nihilism is the beginning. Nihilism is absolute nihilism is where you start. And I say absolute because that's where you should arrive. Then you build back by, should I save that? No, let's say this now. Nihilism is the beginning. You must become absolutely nihilistic where nothing is meaningful, everything is equivalent, nothing has significance. And then from that vantage point, you can start to build toward a rational, independent, self-constructed, self-directed, directly known and experienced narrative and story, personal one, by understanding that, yeah, I initially thought nothing was true, but I know one thing is true. I exist. I know this because I experience, and something must exist to experience. Experience quite literally is proof of existence because it's an existing thing. Now from there, you start to build back more rationally. You start to a much lesser degree of certainty, start to add back in the more durable truths about the world and hold those a little bit more loosely than you hold the notion that you exist, and a lot more loosely than you hold the fact that nothing is ultimately meaningful, everything is equivalent. You start to build back using science, using my videos, philosophy, truths of humanity, things like this, things that are indelible over time, because those are the most likely to be true. And that's how I think we can build toward a self-sustained, supporting, strengthening narrative independently as an adult. And like I said, again, if you have done this properly, then there should be some overlap because you are generally human and other people should be coming to much of the same thing that you're coming to if we're all starting from a clean zero vantage point, a zero state. We need to get back to zero, and then we build from there. Zero is the unadulterated experience of existence, and nothing is true and everything is true. And then we start to build back from there. Oh, we're alive, we're humans. You look like me, you seem similar, your face is a little bit different, your nose, your lips, your eyes, your height, your skin color, your hair, these things. Oh, well, what is this? This is a star, and this, you know what I mean? We start to build back collectively and individually if we're being reasonable, but we need to do most of this work independently, or we'll have someone else try to lay their story and narrative upon us and really sully and just destroy the whole endeavor as a whole. So the whole endeavor as a whole, yes, I said that. But what I'm saying quite literally is nihilism is the beginning. Many people think it's the end. Oh, I'm nihilistic. What am I going to do? How am I going to live? You've just begun. You've just woken up. In a real sense, you have just woken up if you have come to absolute nihilism where everything is equivalent and nothing is elevated, nothing has any ultimate and absolute significance. You have just begun. And you have a lot of work to do. You have a lot to learn, a lot to know, and a lot to uncover, and a lot to learn about yourself, quite literally, because you are the source, the locus, the compass of truth from your perspective. So nihilism is the beginning, and we all need to arrive there if we're going to be right or honest or clear and adult about anything. So never accept nihilism as an ultimate fate. I said I wasn't going to say that in this video, but I'm betraying my word and I'm contradicting my original statement. Never accept nihilism as your ultimate fate. Never do that, because it isn't. It's the beginning state. You're now clean and clear. You're now free of story and narrative, and you're no longer burdened by other people's baggage and imagery and emotions and fears and concerns and desires. You're no longer burdened by this. You are now free and clean. And from that free and clean place, you can right yourself and you can find your way. I will help. I will do my part. I will increasingly, and I'm not joking, leave more clear, more precise and concise and beneficial videos and words of advice for you to find your way, breadcrumbs to a degree. But I can't do it for you. I can't do it for anyone. This is an independent thing. But like I said before, we're mostly the same. I truly believe that. Fundamentally and essentially, we're identical, in my opinion. Your atoms are the same as mine, except for their position in space and time. The only thing that distinguishes you is that your body is made up of those atoms and that arrangement specifically, and they're over there. But my body's over here. That's the distinction. We're ultimately the same, but as we experience at this level of existence and reality, we have a lot more variation. But what I'm saying is that we have enough commonality for there to be a great deal of overlap because we're generally human. Dogs are generally dogs. Cows are generally cows. We have maybe more variation and distinction, maybe quite a bit more, but there's a general broadness to the experience of humanity. Most people like ice cream. Most people think sugar's sweet, things like this. Most people like affection. Most people want to be respected. Most people want a community of like-minded individuals. These are just generally broad and human things. Most people don't want to deal with a bunch of bullcrap and most people don't want to toil in a meaningless and arbitrary way. So these are very common themes throughout humanity and likely throughout time. So we can come to some loose agreement if not a very tight and close one, even though there will be some slight distinction and variation for the individual, which there must be. So nihilism is not the end, it's the beginning. Absolute nihilism is the beginning. And you're on your way. As long as you don't settle into that state and accept that as a fate, then you're going to be okay, in my opinion. Because you're now clear, you're now clean, you're now awake. You're now on your way to being an actual adult. And I don't care if you're 50 years old, 60 years old, until you've made it there, until you've arrived at this painful place, quite literally, because we need meaning, we want it. You are not on your way to being an adult. And I think a lot of people avoid going there because they understand that it is painful and they don't know how to make it through. And a lot of people don't have anything but another story, another narrative for them. And that will not do because they've seen through it, or they will see through it. So a lot of people, in my opinion, can be adults, could be, ought to be, and should be, but they avoid allowing themselves to ponder and question in these deep, introspective, philosophical, and heady and existential ways because they don't want to end up there. They don't believe that they could build anything back that could be as resilient and significant as what they're barely struggling to hold on to. They're barely holding on to and struggling to sustain and support. So most people shield themselves. As I said in the video called Ignorance is Bliss, most people shield themselves from new information, new experiences, new perspectives, new opinions because they don't want to be brought away from the shores of ignorance, away from the haven for the childlike and the juvenile. But that's what I have to say about this. Let's not go too long. Well, I say let's not. I won't go too long on this video because I think I've made my point. And I don't want to burden this by repeating anything unnecessarily, unduly. So nihilism is the beginning, not the end. It's the beginning. And you must become nihilistic. And I mean absolutely, if you ever want to find your own way. I mean that. So thank you for watching this one. If this has been beneficial, if this has been helpful, then leave me a comment, like and subscribe, and find me on my Discord channel that you can find a link to on the About page of this channel, a permanent link, a permanent invite. And if you don't feel like leaving it publicly here, or if you have something that isn't related directly to this video, then find me on Discord, hit me up, ask me anything. Philosophical, metaphysical, spiritual, intellectual, life-related, hopefully. I don't want to talk about what tires are best for the summer. You understand what I'm saying too? We can, but let's not begin there. Once again, thank you for watching this video. Lex Benjamin. I hope to see you on another one, maybe tomorrow. Either way, you have a great day. Take care. Later. Nihilism is the beginning, not the end. But you must become nihilistic. Please get all the way there. Be brave enough, be bold, be strong. And as long as you listen to these videos, as long as you can find me on Discord, I will help you through. I will help you through. It will be painful initially, but just like beginning to exercise and work out can be painful, can create a lot of soreness and discomfort, it is worth it. You will find your way through, and then pretty soon it won't be painful at all. And pretty soon you may find it something you can't turn away from, something you can't resist, this building back, this growth, this deepening, this strengthening, and like I said, deepening of understanding and perspective and knowledge of yourself and of the world. But that's it. Later.